Hello again, everyone. I thought I would come on here today. I want to talk about Thomas Frank and Spurs. First off, I just want to say, I will never, with these, I suppose you'd call them video essays, I would never want to come on and pretend that I know more than Spurs fans or whoever the club is that I happen to be discussing in that particular video. I did one on Scotland recently and I was very, very pleased with the feedback to that because I've had a lot of Scottish fans saying I sort of nailed it and did a good job, and that always fills me with a great sense of pride. But when I want to come on and talk about these specific situations with these YouTube videos, I'm never going to be one of those people who's going to tell you as a Spurs fan that I know as much as you do about your football club. But I do have some views on Thomas Frank and his suitability for the Tottenham job, following on, of course, from that 4-1 defeat for Spurs away at Arsenal in the North London derby, most recently this weekend. I'm torn, really. Obviously, I do the podcast with Flav, Football Between the Lines. He's a Spurs fan, has made his living talking about Spurs with the Fighting Cock podcast for many years now. So I feel like I've got a bit of an insight there into the way that Spurs fans feel about their club and have done since we started that pod. So throughout Ange Postecoglou's time and now with Thomas Frank at the helm. But I look at their performances this season. I know that their home form leaves a lot to be desired. They've won, I think, once in the league at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium so far this season. But their two performances against Chelsea and against Arsenal, two London derbies, the most recent of which against the Gunners is obviously a huge game twice a season for Spurs and Arsenal. And I think their combined XG for these two fixtures is around 0.2. Now, I know there will be plenty of people that don't put any store by XG whatsoever. They think it's a pointless stat, something that shouldn't have any real relevance in the modern game. But realistically, for me, it's a decent qualifier of how good your chances are that you're creating. Obviously, they've scored a goal from very, very long range with Richarlison in that game against Arsenal. But other than that, they posed next to no attacking threat. And pretty much from the very first kick, it felt as though it was a matter of time until Arsenal got their noses in front. Obviously, the timing of the third goal from Abir Eze just after the second half got underway killed it as a contest. But I look at Thomas Frank, and this is a point more widely about managers across the modern game at the upper echelons. And I often feel that if you are going to be front and centre, you're going to be the manager of an elite club, whether they be in the Premier League, in Serie A, in the Liga, in the Bundesliga, wherever it might be, you become so much more than a tactician, or at least you should, and so much more than someone who is only concerned with trying to get a point away from home or 3 points against Arsenal away in a North London derby. It's about capturing people's imaginations and taking them along for the ride as well. And I'm not going to come onto this podcast today and say that Thomas Frank doesn't have the CV for it because he's been at Brentford, because I feel as though that's a reductive argument and one that doesn't make a great deal of sense, because you can't just judge someone on the jobs that they've had. But there is a level of accountability and adaptability here which I think is called into question by Tottenham's performances against Chelsea and against Arsenal in those two London derbies, because there has been a lack of daring and a lack of effort from an attacking perspective to try and put the cat amongst the pigeons. And I think if you speak to any Spurs fan ahead of a North London derby, if you talk to any football fan ahead of a game against their biggest rivals, all they want to see, aside from obviously a positive result, is a team that tries, a team that does, err on the side of rolling the dice rather than just reverting to type and having caution at the core of what they're doing. And the main spark for this video today really comes from the post-match comments from Thomas Frank, where he said that we weren't anywhere near what we should be across the 90 minutes, and I'm sure he would say the same about their performance at home to Chelsea as well. But then he did say we have to remember this team finished 17th last season, and for me that is a gigantic red flag from your manager, because even if you think about the mechanism that brought Thomas Frank to Spurs in the first place, yes, Spurs finished 17th last season. They also won the Europa League. And for the most part, even though you would never expressively have heard Ange Postecoglou say this, I think from sort of March onwards, maybe a little bit before, they wrote off the Premier League season. It was a case of putting all of their eggs in the Europa League basket and going all out to win it, which they did. Now, the reason Ange Postecoglou ended up losing his job at Spurs is undeniably because they finished 17th. You can't be a club of their stature, with the stadium that they've got, with the budget that they've got, with the squad that they've got, and finish 17th in the Premier League table. You can't do it. And that is the exact reason why he was eventually given his marching orders and Thomas Frank was plucked from Brentford and taken to Spurs. So if you're going to lean upon that 17th place finish, almost as if it's the norm, then you have to acknowledge, surely, as the new manager of Spurs, newish now, that you wouldn't have got the job in the first place if that wasn't such an aberration, if that wasn't seen as so far below the standards of Tottenham Hotspur in 2025. And if you think about the scenario that led to Tottenham winning that Europa League trophy, you know, you've got a game there against Manchester United. They dug in, they showed a degree of defensive grit and determination that wasn't in keeping with Ange Postecoglou's general style, but they were able to adapt in a knockout format and get the job done. I know there was a great deal of uncertainty about Ange Postecoglou. He was part of the parade, obviously. He gave that speech to the watching masses of Tottenham fans in which he said that the third season of a TV show is always better than the second. I think there was this palpable sense that many Spurs fans, regardless of saying that as far as they were concerned, it was not sustainable, it wasn't something that he could do in the long term. They wanted to see him given another period as Spurs boss to see whether or not they could actually fight on separate fronts with a more expansive and attacking style of play. What has actually happened since Ange Postecoglou left is that they've gone with Thomas Frank and he's playing defence-minded football. And I'm not going to suggest that you just have to play all-out attack when you are a side that want to be in the Champions League places and challenging for trophies each and every year, but there has to be a bit of both. You know, I said to Flav, we do obviously football between the lines on a Monday and a Thursday. This argument that you can't play with a back five and be an elite team, I just don't buy it. I really, really don't. And, you know, I'm not trying to sell our own manager, Oliver Glasner, for the Tottenham job here at all. I would love nothing more than for Oliver Glasner to put a pen to paper on a 5 or 6 year contract and build a lasting legacy in SE25. He has been truly transformative for Crystal Palace. But I look at Ange Postecoglou's football, which, with the best will in the world, was seat of the pants. You know, you go back to that game against Chelsea, they had 9 men, they're still playing on the halfway line defending. That was chaos, and we all know it. And ultimately, it's why he has ended up losing his job, because that lack of pragmatism led to the 17th place finish. But you go completely the other way with Thomas Frank, and you look at the attacking statistics. I mean, I don't want to boil it down too much, because I appreciate that, you know, there are moments where you have to examine things in greater detail than just looking at a statistical measure for shots on target, for example, or for XG. But I'm going to read you some stats here now from, well, they're taken from FootMob, and they are free statistics after 12 games of the Premier League season. In terms of expected goals, Tottenham ranks 17th. They have 11.1 expected goals across 12 games. In terms of shots on target per match, they rank 16th. They have 3.3 shots on target per match. Chelsea are top of that with 5.6. And in terms of big chances missed, which obviously is directly equating to the amount of chances you're creating across a campaign, they have just 10, which is 16th on the Premier League season so far. Manchester City are at the top of that with 25. So you look at the attacking output from Spurs and the lack of chances being created. I think, as I say, their combined XG against Chelsea at home and against Arsenal away was 0.2. And I've seen so many Spurs fans saying that they don't expect to beat Arsenal away from home. Of course they don't. I don't think they've won there in the league for 15 years now. It is part of their psyche, their makeup. Yes, they hate Arsenal. Yes, they would love nothing more than to get one over on them and do the double across a domestic campaign. But they don't expect it. What they do expect is a degree of daring, a degree of effort to put them under pressure, to score goals, to give them something to think about. And I think realistically, if you look at the 11 that was put out ahead of that game against Arsenal on Sunday, it was waving the figurative white flag from the moment the lineups were announced by the respective clubs. And I'm not sure you can do that. I'm not sure that as a manager of Tottenham, you can go into these games and expect to, you know, have everyone pulling in the same direction and singing off the same hymn sheet when you are setting up a team so defensively. And it's a big thing for me, and I appreciate it's not an easily measurable, I suppose, yardstick for a manager being successful. But I always go back to it. If you speak to O2 or you speak to, I don't know, Vodafone and their customer service, yes, the person on the end of the phone is not the person pulling the strings at that particular company, but for that moment in time, when you are on the phone to them because you've got a gripe or a grievance, they are the public face of that company. They are representing them to you. And I feel as though managers in the modern era, when they speak to the press, when they have these questions posed to them, when they give quotes mentioning the fact that this team finished 17th last year, it's just not good PR. And I appreciate PR shouldn't be the be-all and end-all for a manager. It should be about putting a team out that can win games of football. But I go back to Oliver Glasner again. Oliver Glasner, and I appreciate this is a video about Spurs, and I want to reiterate once more, I am not trying to sell Oliver Glasner for the Tottenham job at all. But he came into a football club that had been told as a fan base over and over again that we had to be careful what we wish for, that we'd been spoiled in recent years. That was a direct quote from Roy Hodgson. These fans have been spoiled in recent years, presumably because we had been in the Premier League and that was seen as the ceiling which we must not get above in Roy Hodgson's mind. Oliver Glasner came in and he didn't make some big grand show of saying, forget all of that, we're going to the moon, lads. It wasn't like that at all. Basically, Oliver Glasner's whole perspective is every team we play are beatable. There is a way of doing it. We are going to set up to win every single game that we play. Yes, there will likely be issues in terms of a lack of rotation across the month of December because I think we're playing once every 3 days and our squad is relatively tight. But following on from the FA Cup final victory, Oliver Glasner stood on the pitch at the FA Cup final parade that we had at Selhurst Park and he said, I was there and I heard it with my own 2 ears, we are in 4 competitions next year, the Premier League, the Europa League, now of course the UEFA Conference because of the issue that we all know happened across the summer, the FA Cup and the League Cup. Let's try and win all 4. Now this isn't a manager saying that we're going to, but it's a manager that wants to strive towards that, who sees no reason why you should set limits, who doesn't want to dampen supporters' expectations, who wants people to believe, who wants people to dream, and who wants people to be empowered in their own abilities to do these things. And if you look at Crystal Palace as a direct case study, a football club who had never won a major trophy prior to Oliver Glasner coming in, he lost Michael Olise in a summer. We went and won the FA Cup. He's lost to Eze to Arsenal. We've gone and we've established ourselves 5th in the Premier League with 20 points after 12 games. We're in the UEFA Conference. We're just outside the top 8 of those places. We're in a League Cup quarter-final. We're going to try and defend the FA Cup, having won it last year. Of course, you are always at the mercy of a poor run of form, but the manager himself sets the tone in the press. He is the one that gets fans on side, gets them believing, gets them wanting to be part of that journey. And if you can get the fan base eating out of the palm of your hand, it doesn't mean you're a snake oil salesman. It doesn't mean that you are trying to fill supporters' heads with dreams that are not fulfillable. It's just a case of firing their imaginations, of making them feel as though their football club are capable of things that we get told by naysayers and sceptics all the time aren't possible. You know, Crystal Palace, I had accepted my lot. I'm 36 years old. I've supported this club all of my life, okay? I did not expect us to ever win an FA Cup. This Austrian manager comes in, he completely changes the expectations, he raises the ceiling, or raises the floor, and he shows us that the brick ceiling that was previously there can be smashed through. And if you've got a manager in Thomas Frank who is not trying to do that, not just in terms of his tactical setup with putting out a defensive side against Arsenal away from home, but also in that quote there about, you've got to remember we finished 17th last season, it's excuse making for the sake of it. I understand it's only 9 words. I understand it's probably a throwaway comment from him at the end of a day where he feels chastened and he feels as though he wants to get his side across and not feel too battered and bruised by the inquest that comes post-match. But if you want to keep the fans on side, particularly at a club like Spurs, who have the financials, who have the stadium, who have the European trophy last season, who are in the Champions League, you have to give them something to cling on to. And if you're not going to do it with your tactical setup, you certainly can't fall back on excuses like this club finishing 17th last season, because there were mitigating circumstances, and ultimately in the net campaign, they still managed to win a European trophy. So that's really where I'm at this morning. I don't know if what I've said here is going to chime with Spurs fans. I hope it does. And I want to reiterate once again, I would never try to tell a supporter of a football club how they should feel about their manager or about their team. But I've seen a lot of talk online over the last 24 to 48 hours about Thomas Frank and about Spurs. and I just wanted to try and put in as neat a package as possible on this Tuesday morning to try and get across my perspective on it, because I would like to think that it's one that would hopefully find a home in many Spurs fans' minds. Other than that, there isn't a great deal for me to add, so I will sign off there. If you've enjoyed the video, please do consider giving it a like or leaving a comment, and even more, pushing the subscribe button, because I'm really back feeling enthusiasm for this medium again, and hopefully, the more subscribers I get, the further up the algorithm I get pushed, and the more there is, a viable reason for me to continue making these YouTube video essays. Have a good one, and bye for now.